Apocryphal documents have not been constrained for 200 years. So what you find is most translations of the Apocrypha tend to be pretty good translations, real translations, not constrained translations. So you get a little different feel from the documents, especially modern ones. On the other hand, remember, Apocryphal documents are Septuagint, and almost all of them are Greek. So yes, the Hebrew feel to the Old Testament documents is very different than the Greek feel that you find in New Testament documents. So what you should find is you should find some similarity with New Testament translations, but maybe still a little more flair. You know, kind of like the New English translation to the Gentiles, or to the Galatians. It says, "You stupid Galatians." It's my favorite verses in the New Testament. "You stupid Galatians." You know, but you don't see that kind of freedom in the earlier King James or earlier translations. They're much more constrained. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
But it's really good to compare. Comparing is really a neat thing. I suggest that all the time. Anyway, I don't have time to go through all these. Here's 14. If you go to my website, you can see these slides. I'll save them as a website on the website. So you see all these slides. These are all the editions. And if you, it's more fun to read the whole thing. So if you read the Apocryphal Esther, you'll get it all together instead of having to look at the editions. But the editions give you kind of a footnote. You can see what has changed. And by the way, when you read this, you'll say, "Why did they take it out?" Doesn't make a lot of sense. Yes, sir?
I've always heard there are no references to God in the book of Esther. Is there any reference to God in the additions to Esther?
Oh yes, big time.
Big time.
You're correct. You are absolutely correct. There are no references to Yahweh, to the God of Israel, in Esther. See, that's my point. That was my point. That because you don't see any of those, that it's very possible that the Aramaic text, the Hebrew and Aramaic text of Esther, was what sold in Babylon. See? And so you have a lot of copies hanging around. As opposed to the Greek version, or, well, maybe the Greek, or perhaps the Hebrew early version that had all this stuff in it, they didn't sell. No.
Thank
In any case, let's see. Oh, here we are. Judith allusions in the New Testament. I don't have time to go through all the Judith allusions because I'm supposed to be going right now to the next one. But here, let's go to the end of the Judith allusions and see there are 12, let's see, there are 11 allusions to Judith in the New Testament documents. 11. There are none to the additions to Esther. So anyway, let's go to the next one because we gotta cover those. We gotta cover the wisdom documents, or we won't be able to even be on time. So, here's all this fun stuff. Wisdom of Solomon. The Wisdom of Solomon, and oh, by the way, the works we're going to look at, we looked at Judith, the additions to Esther, and I put all together. The Wisdom of Solomon, Ecclesiasticus, Baruch, Epistle of Jeremiah, Song of the Three, Story of Susanna, Bell and the Dragon, and the Prayer of Manasseh. Had to. Otherwise, we couldn't get everything done. We'll do Maccabees. Maccabees are very important documents next week. In any case, the Wisdom of Solomon, sometimes just called Wisdom, is a book that's a collection of theological and devotional essays, first written in Greek, what we believe, by an Alexandrian Jew, right? Egyptian Jew, about or before 100 BC. It's presented in such a way that it seemed to be discourses of King Solomon. It quotes the Septuagint. It quotes the Septuagint. But the writer is not acquainted with the ideas of philo. So because of that, that's how we date it. Do you see this? Isn't this neat? This is one of the ways we date documents. So it quotes the Septuagint, which we know was put together about 200 BC, but it doesn't have any ideas from philo, because this is a very Hellenized document. The author compares Jewish religion with Greek philosophy and mystery religion, mysterium. It's really neat. And shows faith to be the highest form of wisdom. It's very Hellenized view of man. What does that mean? The Hellenized view of man is that there is sarx, psuche, and punum. So sarx is flesh, Tsuke, that's where psyche comes from. Psyche literally in the Greek means the breath of life. So it means your breath. But we take it to mean, and the Greeks to a large extent meant that to mean intellect. The pneuma is the spiritual or eternal part of a person. Both tsuke and pneuma mean breath. Tsuke is an involuntary breath. Pneuma is a voluntary breath, to be very simplest in the Greek. Don't have time to get in great detail, but in any case, a very strong change from Old Testament view of punishment during life to one of punishment after death. Strong animus to sex, against sex, marriage, and children. Isn't that interesting? The book is edifying and worthy of much respect. It has often been quoted by Christian writers in the past. And by the way, this is where a lot of the Catholic Church gets their view about the priesthood. The reasons the rabbis would not like wisdom. It's a very Hellenized view of man. What is the Hebrew? Anybody remember the Hebrew or know the Hebrew view of man? The original Hebrew view of man is that man is made up of sarx and psuke. He has no pneuma. So the original view, remember, the Sadducees believed that what? When you died,
It's over.
it's over. That's it. You know, if anything, you go to Gehenna, which is a very unpopular place to be. That's Hades, right? So the Greek worldview was that you had an eternal part. So guess what? Pharisaic, Essene, Zealot worldview are what? Hellenized. It's a very Hellenized worldview. What's our worldview? What's Christian worldview? Hellenized. When you see an Apocrypha, remember I told you, the Apocrypha is a transition from Old Testament worldview to a New Testament Greek rational worldview. This is a transition. And so we see this in the Wisdom of Solomon. It's a late-date book. I mean, late-date, I say 100 BC. It's, you know, but very interesting because very Hellenized view of man, so the rabbis would not like that. There are historical issues, but this is a Dirash book. It's Dirash, right? It has no intention of being historical. The animus to sex, marriage, and children, that's a strong change from the Old Testament view. And I hope that's not a New Testament view. I know whose view that is, but it's not my view. And it's not, I don't think it's a very positive view of the world. But, you know, if you look at the culture of the time and the society and the history of the time, you know, this is a suicidal kind of worldview. And the Essenes and the Zealots kind of exposed or had this worldview to a degree. In any case, a lot of the Christian and Catholic view of the world came from this document, from this book. More reasons. There's a strong train of thought that just, holy, and wise that any group will achieve righteousness and immortality by pleasing God. It's a very strong transition to a New Testament view. It implies Solomon's the author. That's that historical issue. Talmudic details in this book that are not in the Old Testament. Talmudic details. There's a statement of redemption, not just forgiveness. And by the way, New Testament, especially Paul's letters, use many allusions. There's over 100 allusions and quotes directly from wisdom. Very important. There are issues in wisdom. It implies that Solomon's the author. There's Talmudic details, etc., etc. But very worthwhile to read, especially since, guess who read it? Paul. Paul read this document, was very familiar with it, and used, well, I'm not going to go through them all. I'm going to, I left them in this presentation. So that if you want to go look at all of them, you may. I got a cramp in my hand just getting these in, you know, and I was just copying them. Okay? 63. I thought there were only 63, but there are 100 and something of these things. Let's see, 69, 70, 73, okay. I only left them for you. There are 92 allusions, indirect quotes and direct quotes from Wisdom of Solomon in the New Testament documents. Now let's look at this one. Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes literally means church book. What did they call the church in the New Testament period? The ecclesia. Same as the Orthodox Church calls it, the ecclesia. This book, Ecclesiasticus, church book. Do you think this was used a lot by the early church? Any of the Pauline letters called church book. This was the most read document in the early church. Just by the title. It originally was called The Wisdom of Jesus, son of Sirach. Jesus ben Sirach. Or simply Sirach. Written in the 1st century Hebrew about 200 BC. The original text was lost in antiquity until 1896 when we have fragments in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was written by a wisdom teacher called Joshua ben Sirach, translated into Greek by his grandson around 135 BC. Let's see. Consists mainly of proverbs and other wise sayings about common life strung together in short discourses organized in topical sections. Contains longer discourses about religious life, etc., etc. Very strong Torah connection. You ever wonder where Paul got his comparisons about the breaststroke of faith, the helmet of salvation? You know what I'm talking about? Guess where he got it? It's written in this book first. Almost in total. That's where he borrowed it. It's a Greek allusion. Only book in the Old Testament, Apocrypha New Testament, that we know the fully attributed author from a second source. That is Jesus ben Sirach. The only one. Now, that doesn't mean the authorship of the other documents are in that big a question. It just means that this is the only one that you can prove. If you were to say, can I prove beyond a shadow of a doubt who is the author of the Pauline letters? You can't, because there is not a secondary source to them in that period. But there is to Jesus ben Sirach, Joshua ben Sirach. Joshua and Jesus, same name, by the way. The reasons the rabbis would not like it. It's the most read book in the early church. Hey, wait. This is the most read book in the early church? You guys read all the time, right? If you're a Christian, you go, no, you don't. Why don't you? If you're Anglican, you get some of these. Isn't that interesting, though? Greek version may have been only known in antiquity. Strongly Torah-based as opposed to Proverbs. Very strongly Torah-based. You didn't know that Proverbs was not Torah-based, did you? Just read it. Compare them. That's a good comparison. Look at Torah, look at Proverbs, and see what they say. See if they match. This one does. It demonstrates the view of the period and not classical Old Testament view, which is interesting too. And it's not strongly Hellenized. Not strongly Hellenized. There are no issues. Ecclesiasticus is probably the strongest work in the Old Testament and the Apocrypha in terms of being a cohesive work. Maccabees is next. First Maccabees is next best. I can't go through these, but I'm going to flip them. There's 100 of these. 100 of these allusions. And by the way, you know why I show you all these allusions and quotes, etc., to these documents? Can you guess? I may have mentioned it in an earlier class, but one of the big deals to me is someone told me that the reason we don't have the Apocrypha in our Bibles is because there are no quotes from the New Testament in the Apocrypha. Or there's no quotes from the Apocrypha in the New Testament. There are over 1,000, guys. So if someone ever told you that, they're wrong. As a matter of fact, class after next, I'm going to show you the 6 quotes that are from other sources than the Old Testament and the Apocrypha. And there are others that we don't even know where they come from. There are quotes that we have not identified yet in the New Testament documents. So if New Testament documents quote pagan literature, why do you think they wouldn't quote the Apocrypha? But this is one of the facetious arguments given for why we don't have the Apocrypha. We learn, though, it was because of printing costs. But, most people don't understand that.
So Ecclesiasticus is different from Ecclesiastes?
Yes.
Okay.
Very different. Ecclesiastes, means church.